Guillermo. Emil Amok to you. Welcome to the Takeout. This is Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. I hope you had a considerably nice weekend. Welcome to Monday. And what a Monday it is. The autocrats are like beating their chests. You got Putin in Russia. You got the autocrat light, or maybe autocrat junior, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., essentially winning by a landslide. Nothing's official yet. The count is still on, but the votes are being tallied in the Philippines, and it looks like the polls were right. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., a.k.a. Bong Bong, will go on to win in a landslide. And let's be fair. We don't know if he's going to be an autocrat. We just know it's in his DNA. We also know that democracy is in the DNA of the Philippines. And we as Americans, because America put that democratic DNA in the Philippines, we ought to be looking at this, because this is what happens when a sovereign nation gets taken over, well, first by Spain, then is sold by virtue of the Spanish-American War to the United States for $20 million. And then the United States goes in and installs its first colonial nation, its first imperialized nation, the Philippines, right? It's America's first colony. Figure, if you're a colony, a former colony, then you know what it's like, and you should maybe not want to colonize another country. But the United States, 1898 to 1902, fought that Philippine-American War, the American-Philippine War, made the Philippines a colony in 1902, or after the war was over. War was over in 1902, and essentially there were some skirmishes up in the hills, but when the United States paid $20 million to Spain, essentially for the Spanish buildings, the Catholic buildings of the Philippines was an American colony. And so now we see how this history plays out. This is an American history playing out in 2022. We have Bong Bong Marcos, a.k.a. BBM. That's what they call him in the Philippine newspapers. We have him winning essentially by a landslide. The count still goes on, but we don't know. We want to be fair. We don't know if he's going to take on true autocratic kinds of airs, or if he's just going to be a Marcos and just be an elitist. Because you can be an elitist, an oligarch, and not necessarily be an autocrat, but the autocracy from Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s father from the 60s, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the dictator, pretty much has been picked up by the outgoing president, Rodrigo Duterte, and his extrajudicial killings and the way he's gone with an iron fist against the drug trade. Now, as I say that, there are some people who applaud what he's done. To clean up Manila, to clean up Mindanao, to clean up the Philippines. Of course, it comes at a price. It comes at the price of people's lives. It comes at the price of a really tough crackdown where literally thousands of people have been caught in a kind of semi-official dragnet that has been undertaken by the police and the military. The International Criminal Court is out to adjudicate and prosecute Duterte, but Duterte may get protection from Ferdinand Marcos Jr. So that would be one inclination of how autocratic Bong Bong might be. But all this is still yet to come. You know, there are people flying from the United States to the Philippines, people who are dual citizens, who want to see the prospects of the current vice president, Leni Robredo, to rise. But it looks like that's not going to happen. The polls are just predicted insurmountable numbers in favor of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. It's materialized, and even though there are reports of violence and there are some reports of some electoral ballot machines breaking down, nothing that would cut into the kind of lead that Marcos has now. So I'm just looking at the Times. The New York Times is reporting that with 90.1% of the election returns counted in a preliminary tally as of 1:47 a.m. Tuesday, they're ahead in the Philippines, Tuesday morning, Manila time. Marcos had 28.8 million votes, more than double that of his closest rival Leni Robredo, which clearly puts him on the path to win the election. And this is the Times reporting this. I reported or wrote my column in on the Aldef blog, and I entitled it, "Many Asian American Filipinos Dread a Marcos Victory." I mean, I think that's fair to say that America has been kind of like the point of exile for many freedom-loving Filipinos ever since Marcos. Some of them were in exile here in the United States and went back when Cory Aquino and the People Power movement took over in the mid-'80s. But some of them established homes and they were kind of binational. And so we have a whole, just a huge overseas Filipino crowd, both in the United States and Canada. And in my column, I point out that there's about, let's see, what's the number that I used? 1.7 million overseas workers overall in Europe. This is part of the Filipino diaspora. But in the U.S., it's about 190,000 eligible voters in the U.S., plus another, 50,000 or so, I think, in Canada. So you have a huge number here. And if you think, the overseas votes, which the people here are going back to the Philippines to make sure they get counted, you might say, that's not that many. You're only talking about 2 million votes. But the significance is what those overseas voters represent in terms of monies to the Philippine economy. In terms of remittances, the Philippines' overseas population sent back $30 billion last year, $30 billion. And from the U.S. alone, it's about $13.2 billion. So not an insignificant number. So overseas workers here, and many of them are in the New York, Washington, D.C. area, not just California. They're interested in going back there and making sure that all the votes are counted. Although, as I said, when you're talking about, the Times is reporting with 90% of the vote in, 28.8 million votes for Marcos, which is more than double that of Leni Robredo. It's not looking good for the I call them the pro-democracy movement among Filipinos. Let's just say among Filipinos, not just the overseas Filipinos. But because I write primarily for an American audience, this is kind of a strange day. Because if you think democracy is getting trashed in America because of all the things that are going on in the Supreme Court, things going on over abortion, voting rights, affirmative action, other issues, well, just think, if you're a dual citizen of the U.S. and the Philippines, today you feel twice as bad. This, as I said, as we've been talking, Election Day in the Philippines, it's over now. The votes are being counted on Tuesday. They're ahead over there. And it looks like the U.S.'s first colony, which ultimately was modeled to be our democracy in miniature, poised to do what 35 years ago may have been unthinkable. And that is the election of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., a.k.a. Bong Bong, the son of the late ousted Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr., in a landslide. So they elect the Philippine presidents and vice presidents separately, and we have the Veep candidate, Sara Duterte, the daughter of the current Philippine president, Rodrigo Duterte, also ahead in her race. She appeared to be clinching the vice presidency with 24.4 million votes. That's triple that of Senator Francis Pangilinan, who was sort of running in sync with Robredo. So it was the Marcos Duterte collaboration, you might say. BBM, Bong Bong Marcos called it the unity ticket, which in a way is the consolidation of everything bad in the history of modern Philippine politics. But all I need to do is just point you to that UN Human Rights Council 2020 report that said since Duterte was elected into office, more than 27,000 suspected drug peddlers have been killed in a mix of police operations and vigilante killings, and more than 250 human rights defenders, unionists, lawyers, journalists, environmental rights activists were all killed. This is under Duterte. So you don't have to go far back, all the way back to Marcos in the 60s to say, oh, there's like hints of autocracy in the Philippines. Just go back to the current presidential administration of Rodrigo Duterte, who for a time had partial martial law, not throughout the entire islands, but just in Mindanao, where he was, Duterte, the former mayor of Mindanao. So, I mean, that's a hefty number. 27,000 suspected drug dealers killed in those extrajudicial murders. I think the number has gone up because that was in a 2020 Human Rights Council report by the UN. Now, compare all that with Marcos, Ferdinand Marcos. Amnesty International said Ferdinand Marcos imprisoned 70,000 people during martial law, tortured 34,000, killed 3,200 Filipinos. So he's only killed 3,200 people. Oh, compared to the torturing and the imprisoning, a small number, 3,200. But compared to Duterte, more than 27,000 suspected of drug dealing, killed. So both the Marcos and the Duterte governments, horrible records, horrible human rights records. Now, add on the money that the Marcoses supposedly plundered, about $10 billion. No one comes close to the Marcoses. I mean, they've recovered some money, but there's about $2.5 billion that remains in litigation. And the question will be, if Marcos goes on and is officially declared the winner, then the government is going to have to figure out, well, how do we go after the rest of our money? Or will the officials left in power find, or be able to find, the political courage to go after the Marcoses once they're reinstalled as the country's leaders? So this is the situation, right? This is the situation on the day after the election day. Of course, you had Filipino Americans here who were mindful of the disinformation that is part of the election process in the Philippines. Keep in mind that it is almost like a brown Trump situation over there, a brown version of American Trumpism, because they did use the internet. They had trolls spewing disinformation. They had outright policy falsehood spread on Facebook pages, on the web, flat out lies about historical facts. Because you might say, Emil, how does this happen? How does this happen in the Philippines? Well, it happens because the Filipinos there who were pro-Marcos relied on the autocracy playbook, relied on the Trump playbook. And then add that to the fact that the Marcos family has been rehabbed by the Duterte administration since 2016, when Duterte took office. It was Duterte, you recall, in 2016, who buried Ferdinand Marcos in the National Hero Cemetery after essentially just being refrigerated for all these years in a sort of a kind of a museum type setup in Ilocos Norte, which is north of Luzon. Duterte, with the Supreme Court's blessing, was able to say, Marcos is a hero. He needs to be buried here. And as soon as that happened, that was the turnaround, the rehab effort. It only has taken 6 years. The Marcos family came back after they were exiled in 1986, or rather 87. They were exiled. They come back. They start working in Congress. They start working locally. And now the culmination, 2022, Bong Bong, as he was known, becomes, or is poised to become, the next president of the Philippines. I don't know. I said in some columns in the Philippine media that it's hard to imagine this kind of thing happening after what the Philippines went through from the 60s through the 70s to the 80s, and then to see people power come on, Corazon Aquino essentially oust Marcos, and Marcos flees in exile to Hawaii. But one thing about the Filipinos, and I kind of understand this, they really are a security-minded kind of folk. And when things are going wrong and they desire safety, they are prone to the strongman approach. And even after Corazon Aquino, some might argue that they didn't know what to do with the kind of people power they were given. And there was some corruption, certainly post Aquino, several administrations. And then you get to Aquino's son, who did okay, but when the Aquino presidency, the son of Aquino, when that passed, they left the door open for someone like Rodrigo Duterte, who was a local mayor out of Mindanao, but known for his heavy-handed law enforcement tactics. And it worked. He sold it to the people. They bought it. Keep in mind, this election here today, there were a number of old-line Philippine politicians, some of whom may have been considered too old-fashioned. Lenny Robredo, the current vice president, got a lot of votes from millennials, according to reports, and Gen Xers and Gen Zs. A lot of young people voting for Lenny Robredo. But to no avail. Someone who fared poorly was Manny Pacquiao, the boxer. Some people thought throughout Manny Pacquiao's career that popularity of being the boxer of the nation could somehow be a metaphor that would excite voters. It didn't. Manny Pacquiao's not going anywhere toward the presidential palace. Still in the Senate, I believe, but the results were clear. Pacquiao did not capture the imagination of Philippine voters. So what we have here is really part of the global geopolitical trend. Watch for the vote to become more official, but at this point, with more than 90% of the vote in, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Bong Bong, seems to have won the presidency in the Philippines, to the great dismay and disappointment of democracy-loving Filipinos, not just in the Philippines, but to those dual Filipino-American citizens who voted here, sent back their ballots. As I said, there's going to be a contingent going back to the Philippines to make sure that all the ballots are counted, but it would appear to be a moot point for them, since there just doesn't seem to be a way for Lenny Robredo to take over the large lead that Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has established. So that's where we are. It's the latest black eye for modern democracy in our world. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the late dictator, essentially put back into power by the Philippines in their presidential election today. I have more in my columns in Inquirer.net, but sad day for people who just have a lot of hope in the Philippines. I've been mixed about the Philippines and their democracy, because I've been an observer of the Marcoses for years, since the 80s. And when I saw how the Philippines adapted to democracy given to them by the U.S. and then massaged by the dictator Marcos, part of me just said, look, it's their country. We're not the sovereigns, or they're the sovereigns. We gave them democracy. This is what Philippine democracy looks like. It doesn't look like ours. Who's their Thomas Jefferson? Who's their, I don't know. I was trying to think of some kind of giant of jurisprudence. Who is their George Washington? And it's almost unfair to say they should have one. They're Filipino. And this is the way it is. But also it indicates that when you don't have a strong rule of law, this is the way the experiment of democracy looks. So if you're a lover of democracy, the way that maybe they do it in America, well, you don't have a whole lot to talk about, really, because we're not perfect. So maybe we should just look to see how it plays out. Does Bong Bong Marcos, BBM, does he channel? Who would he channel? His inner Thomas Jefferson, his inner John Quincy Adams? That's a weird thought. Or does he channel his father, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the dictator? The world's watching. Remember, this is a day that Putin has declared victory in Russia. The son of an autocrat declares victory in Manila. It's just a bad day for world democracy. So today also is a day for the Pulitzer Prizes, and I tweeted that out, and I don't want to give it short shrift, but congratulations to Christina Wong. Christina Wong and her play, Sweatshop Overlord, won the 2020, well, she became a finalist. She did not win. She became a finalist. But look, this is akin to just being nominated. You're not just nominated for the prize. You didn't win the prize, but you are a finalist, and you get a little mention on the Pulitzer Prize website. Look, Christina Wong, constant inspiration to me as a solo performer. I first saw Christina Wong when she did a number of shows, but in San Francisco, she did the Wong Street Journal. I saw that at the Brava Theater a few years back. Kristina used to write for Kamau Bell when Kamau did that late night show. Very, very bold and sassy and bright and in your face, and just she's just a very provocative and a fascinating solo performer. And I'm just glad that she got some Pulitzer recognition. Sweatshop Overlord was really her response as an artist to what was going on during the pandemic. She got together her aunties and they started sewing masks. Not all of them, they were decorative and great, and they were face coverings. They weren't KN95s or N95s. But this is a time when even the CDC was saying, well, just put some covering. Any kind of covering would do, even a folded over t-shirt. So Kristina went into action, got her group together. These sewing aunties made her show Sweatshop Overlord. I think it's tremendous that it goes from solo show to a show that she gave at Wesleyan and all throughout different venues in the country. Oh, but because of COVID, she did a lot online, and that's where I saw it. So congrats to Kristina. I know it's not like you won the big Pulitzer. I know you would have rather have won the big Pulitzer, but to be named as a finalist is no small feat. Congratulations to Christina Wong. Glad to call her my friend. She's been a friend for many years, and an artist, and also an elected official, because she did another show about being. She's not a like the councilman, but she's a representative, a neighborhood representative in LA to, I believe, the city council. It's an elected grassroots post. And she did a one woman show about that. So I hope this only helps to encourage her work and encourage producers and theaters. She did the Sweatshop Overlord in New York as well, as I recall, during the tail end of the pandemic. Well, we're at the tail end now, but the tail end of 2021. So, and now my website, or not my website, but my internet's a little slow. I want to read you the rest of the finalists. Got to pop open the page, and it's not giving it to me. Give it to me. So I wanted to read out the list, but for some reason see, this is my internet's slow. I can't open. Oh, here it is. Oh, it won't let me open up the list to get all the prize winners for this year. Okay, here I'm opening up prize winners because the prize winners are interesting. The Washington Post was a winner. The New York Times won in news. I mean, this is always a big day if you're a journalist. The Washington Post won for its January 6th reporting, which is great because I did like their coverage this year. Okay, here, 2022, the winner of the drama. Let's go back to the drama. Fat Ham by James I. James won for drama. It's about Hamlet to a family barbecue in the South, grappling questions of identity, kinship, responsibility, and honesty. James I. James, Fat Ham, won for drama, beating out Kristina and beating out Selling Kabul. But still, Christina Wong, Sweatshop Overlord, about her time as a sweatshop overlord. If you get a chance to see it, maybe she'll get a chance to go out there with it again. But nothing embarrassing to be a finalist. Breaking news, let's see. The breaking news category, because that's news. And my internet's slow. Who won the breaking news category? Spinning. God, I'm sorry about this. Okay, it won't give me the winners. The Pulitzer website is too slow for me. I can't open it up. Let's see here. Here's the winner, and I've opened up winners and prizes. It won't give me all the prize. This is a first world problem, Emil. You should have better internet. Okay, I give up. I give up on that. Anyway, the New York Times won a number of. Let's see. Now I can find out if I go to the New York Times site. Okay, here we are, the New York Times site. Let's see how they brag about winning a Pulitzer. Well, it's not front and center on their website. So it must not be. Oh, here it is. Pulitzer Prizes spotlight January 6. New York Times won multiple awards, and the Washington Post won the public service category for its reporting on the attack on the Capitol. An investigation into deadly police traffic stops around the U.S. won the Times the National Reporting Prize. Salimishad Tillit, contributing critic, won for the Times in the criticism category for writing on race and arts and culture. Andrea Elliott won in the general nonfiction category for her book Invisible Child, Poverty, Survival, and Hope in an American City. And the Times won in the international category for Failures of America's Air War Across the Middle East. Okay, so the Times and the Post, they all won. The Washington Post won for The Attack, a sprawling chronological examination of January 6th. Public service category. That is sort of like the premier award. The Miami Herald won for breaking news for the coverage of the Champlain Towers South condo tower in Surfside that killed 100 people. Congratulations to them. The Tampa Bay Times won for investigative reporting for Poisoned, a lead smelter in Tampa, Florida. So, yeah. The Pulitzers, $10,000, that's what they win. And they split it up. I know that because I won an AAJA prize for civil rights and social justice reporting. Only $5,000, and my line was, it's half a Pulitzer. All right, so we cover the Pulitzers. It's important. You know, the Pulitzer Prizes are important, but they're sort of like the Kentucky Derby of journalism. Did you watch the Kentucky Derby this week? It was one of the few things that I like to do the first week of May, but I don't bet on the Kentucky Derby. I didn't even know who the favorites were. But I only watch it to see if someone screws up and if a horse loses or gets hurt or someone, you know, there's some kind of egregious act, because horse racing is a terrible, horrible sport. And my penance for having participated in horse racing, like my father did all throughout my life, was to add horse racing to my vegan practice. So it's a violation of my veganism, which I know sounds kind of boring, right? No, but it's true. I can still watch it. I just can't partake, and I watch it to be kind of like a watchdog. But it's interesting because an 80-1 shot won. Rich Strike. And if you saw the overhead of that race, you understand how races work. Races work because, as the saying goes, pace makes the race. Now, what does that mean? That means you got a long race, a mile and a quarter. Mile and a quarter is the Kentucky Derby. And if you have fast horses going out, establishing a fast pace, those fast horses soon peter out at about the 3/4 point of the race. And then those horses who just try to keep up but save their one last run, their one big run for the stretch. And then as the horses who went out to the lead first tire, the horses from the back come and take over. That's a long stretch run, and those late runners win the Kentucky Derby. That's called pace makes a race, and this year was no exception. Although the late runners, those who appeared to be the late runners at the top of the stretch, Epicenter and Rich Strike, apparently were just mid runners, meaning they were burning out just as much as the really true early leaders. And so that as they passed the tiring early leaders, those what I call mid runners, then they kind of lost a step and slowed down a bit, making them susceptible to true late runners, those who came from behind and then in the stretch, once in the stretch, bolted past Epicenter and Rich Strike, who appeared like they were going for the win. I mean, Epicenter was like clear racetrack. But now if you caught any of the drone type photos, the aerial shots, there was this one horse, Rich Strike, who comes up from behind and just sort of, easily runs, because these horses can run all day if they're not asked, if they're not forced to really put out their best effort. And Rich Strike passed a bunch of horses, still mid-pack, sort of like easy kind of run. Finally moves to the rail. There's one horse in front of it. It moves to the side to the two, what they call the two path, and is clear. And just with about, I'd say less than a quarter of a mile to go. And so it's running, and the only horses in front of Rich Strike were Zandon and Epicenter. And there was simplification too. Those three looked like they were going to run off and win because it was a clear path. It was their race to lose if they had enough gas. And it looked like maybe they did, but as I said, they weren't the early runners, they were the mid runners. And ultimately, they weren't as fast as the late runners who came up from behind, namely Rich Strike on the rail. My God, Rich Strike, 80-1. And if you liked red and white, well, those were his colors. He was number 21. If you like, lucky numbers, lucky 21. Rich Strike, if your name was Rich. If you're a bowler and like the name Strike. If your name was Richard and you were a bowler, Rich Strike, number 21, red and white. If you bet $2 at an 80-1, you win something like $162, which is not bad for sitting back and watching 21 horses run for 2.5 minutes or so in the Kentucky Derby. Rich Strike was, that's how you should handicap. Some people say, the New York Times writer, Joe Drape, is saying, this is going to revitalize the sport. No, it's not going to revitalize the sport. It's going to make people realize that this is a crapshoot. Because who knew who was going to run, who was going to create the pace? You might be able to predict it, but a lot of it is determined by how horses bunch up, by how they feel at the time. Rich Strike had what they call a lucky trip and the right pace style to win and beat Epicenter. And Epicenter had to disappoint his trainer, Steve Asmussen, who had been really criticized years ago, a few years back, for drugging horses. He looked like he had one of the clear favorites. He was looking to win. No. And I'm sure he looked like, hey, I'm in the clear, I'm going to win. And then out of nowhere, here comes Rich Strike to beat him by 3/4 of a length. Now, I don't think Rich Strike makes anyone think that, oh, what a great game this is. Andy Beyer, who's a professional handicapper, is so good. Yeah, he's a Harvard grad. He has been betting on the races for decades. He is kind of like the dean of racing writers. Not only that, if you go to the racetrack, the Beyer figures are named for him. He picked 2 horses. He said Summer is Tomorrow was his long shot. Summer is Tomorrow, the number 4 horse, finished 64 1/4 lengths behind Rich Strike. Dead last in 20th place. So much for the guru of speed handicapping, Andy Beyer. His other horse that he picked was White Abarrio, possibly because it was a brilliant gray Rhonish color. White Abarrio, the number 15 horse, finished 19 3/4 lengths behind Rich Strike. Good for 16th out of 20. Once again, those are the 2 horses of Andy Beyer, a guy I like. I've talked to him in the past. I wouldn't say he's my friend, but I like him. I like Andy. But he still plays the races. And look how deadly wrong he was. Now, some people say, oh, well, I bet the favorite, and I like this horse, Messier. Messier finished 19 lengths behind the winner at 15th. Oh, well, I saw Dylan Dreyer on the Today Show, and she liked this horse, Cyberknife. And look, I like Dylan Dreyer too, right? She's the weather gal. If you don't like Al Roker, I like Al Roker, but Dylan Dreyer is much prettier than Al Roker. But what does she know about? She looks good in a hat at the Kentucky Derby. Cyberknife finished 42.5 lengths behind in 18th place. So I'm just telling you how Joe Drape in the New York Times says this could revitalize racing. No, it doesn't. Oh, well, maybe in the sense that anyone can win. It's a crapshoot. But it shows you that you're better off, if you're a sports bettor, you're better off betting on football or baseball or basketball, Golden State Warriors tonight, or any other sport. I mean, real sport. The Kentucky Derby is, and horse racing in general, is not a real sport. I mean, it may have been, but there's too many drugs in the game, first of all. Too much cruelty. And isn't it funny that maybe the biggest thing that came out of this Derby is the fact that Rich Strike, after it won, and the outrider and his pony were to gather up Rich Strike and bring him to the finish line, the outrider was seen punching repeatedly Rich Strike, the winner. The outrider punching Rich Strike with his fist. No way to treat a winner. No way to treat an animal. So we're going to have to see if that outrider is disciplined. And isn't it funny that the outrider is the brother of a former associate, or an associate, of Steve Asmussen, who was the trainer of the number 2 or the second place horse, Epicenter. So I'm sure the outrider probably had a few dollars on Epicenter and was mad that he'd lost the race. That is horse racing. Okay, I hope you had a fun Mother's Day. I had a fun Mother's Day. I want to mention 2 documentaries. One was a Mother's Day documentary. It turns out to be one. It was on television. It's also on Netflix. It's an American Masters documentary featuring Amy Tan. If you saw that on Netflix earlier, I didn't watch it when it first came out. I did see it on PBS. It's fascinating. Look, I've never met Amy Tan. I even like Amy Tan. I like Wayne Wong, who did the film version of Joy Luck Club. I just, I like Amy Tan, what she stands for. She's a writer. The breakthrough she made, 1989. But I knew it was more a women's book, and so I just sort of let the people talk about it who really loved her writing. I love the fact that she was there and doing it, and I honored her being who she was. But I didn't feel like I didn't want to get into the whole criticism about, well, was Amy Tan being truthful in her fiction? Was she not being an activist enough? She said something in that documentary which put things in perspective for me. She was noticing how Asian Americans were criticizing her for, some would say, perpetuating a certain stereotype about the community. That was what some of the scholarship was from critics. I don't know if I was one of them. I don't think I was at that time in '89. But I saw her point. She said, look, I'm a fiction writer. I don't write propaganda. And that term got to me when she said that. And I have nothing but respect for Amy Tan. But I know that she faced some of that criticism. But she also got a lot of love from people who saw it as a story of a woman, a mother, story about mothers and women. But I know that she had some issues with the reception, how the book was talked about, and then how it formed blocks in her ability to write future work. And I just really thought it was a skillfully done documentary done by Robert Redford's kid, James Redford, who died. He's from Fairfax, Marin County, died, which is really sad. And because it was skillful, very imaginative, using the work and Amy Tan's voice and her reading. And I have to say now, after all these years, I want to revisit the writing of Amy Tan. That was my Mother's Day gift. And I say this as someone who I'm writing at the same time. I'm just a contemporary media person, Asian America. And I just never have given Amy Tan the kind of props she deserves. But she deserves them. And I appreciated seeing the documentary on PBS. If you missed it, catch it on Netflix. It's still on there. And it'll give you a perspective on truly one of the voices of Asian America. I also want to give a shout out to Ben Fong Torres. His documentary, or a documentary on him, Suzanne Kai Joe's documentary, came out or has just been issued on Netflix. Catch that, about the rock and roll DJ Ben Fong Torres. Someone mentioned me on a post in Facebook about Ben's documentary. I have nothing but love for Suzanne and Ben. Ben used to be a neighbor of mine when I lived near the Castro. I think he lives in the Castro. I was a couple blocks away down toward Church Street in San Francisco, 17th Church. But Ben is And I know about Ben because his brother Barry was a great. They borrowed the name Fong Torres because his father was a great admirer of Filipino labor folks. And so the Torres part was added to the Fong. His brother Barry was how I got to know Ben, or of Ben, but Ben you got to know because he was on KSAN, the hippie radio station, the progressive radio station in San Francisco. And then, of course, Ben was in Rolling Stone. He was a writer on the cover of the Rolling Stone. So I was a DJ in 1975 in Houston, Texas. A heritage progressive rock, play what you want kind of radio station that then sort of got more commercialized. But on my shift, I was interviewing Bonnie Raitt. Love Bonnie Raitt. She comes in, tagging along Bonnie Raitt is Ben Fong Torres. And as much as I love Bonnie Raitt, I was more interested as a San Franciscan in connecting with Ben, who was like trying to be fly on the wall, writing down, taking notes about his observations of Bonnie Raitt. But anyway, I thought the BFD was BFT in the studio that day in Houston in 1975. Never forgot that. So I haven't caught the documentary yet. But of course, what's not to love? You got to love the Ben Fong Torres documentary. It's out there. Catch it on Netflix. And then I just want to talk about a couple other things. Number one, I mentioned the Warriors. They're playing tonight. It's tough. They're trying to blame, or the Grizzlies are trying to blame Jordan Poole for taking a swipe at the knee of John Morant. I saw the video. You can see the video. It's on YouTube. From the looks of it, it's just like you're swatting at things, trying to get the ball. Whether you grab a knee, I mean, it may look like he grabs a knee, but you just don't know. If you play defense, the ball's going really fast. You super slow down the video, and it may look like Jordan Poole is grabbing a knee. But I think Jordan Poole is an honest player. He's not Draymond Green. He's just an honest. I think he's a player of high integrity who wants to play the game well. That's not his game, like he said. I don't think for a second he was trying to pull someone's knee to hurt anyone. I think when you're swatting your hands, playing defense, going for the ball, someone moves and suddenly, boom, you think you're going for the ball, you're hitting someone's knee. Look, it's an asynchronous dance out there when you're playing defense in basketball. So I don't think it's a dirty play, and the league's not going to discipline Jordan Poole. They shouldn't, but it looks like John Morant is going to play because he got hurt. Well, they can play without John Morant. They've won without John Morant. It's still going to be a good game. I hope the Warriors win to go up 3-1 because they need to rest and think about playing the winners of the next series, which looks like it might be the Phoenix Suns, but who knows? You got to play the games. No matter what you might think or prognosticate or predict on paper, you got to play the games. So I say good luck to the Warriors. At the same time, the Warriors are playing. The Giants will be playing And the Giants super pitcher, Carlos Rodon, is pitching tonight against the Rockies. That should be good. It looks like it's going to be a tight race. All the teams are good now in the West. The Rockies, the Diamondbacks, the Giants, Dodgers, they're all going to be good. And but Lamont Wade Jr. is back. He hit a home run over the weekend. The Giants praised Buster Posey. We're only in May. It's a long season. But it looks like baseball season is going to be good this year. One final thing before we say goodbye today. Norm Mineta. Norm Mineta, the family had a little gathering. I was happy to be part of, I guess there were about 300 people who were there. I'll talk about it tomorrow. Still very saddened. It's been a week now, but there will be moments when we will miss what Norm Mineta stood for. Because what he stood for was hope in divided government. Because who was reaching out to try to solve problems and to create the kind of change that we aspire to. One thing I told an African American audience recently, Norm Mineta won reparations. A Democrat in a Republican administration, Ronald Reagan's administration. How do you do that? It's almost like a magic trick. It's just hard work in politics. But it takes courage, something we don't see today. So I'll talk more about it as the week goes on. Some thoughts about getting people together to mourn Norm Mineta. In the meantime, regular listeners to this show know that this is the time that we embrace one another, that we do our meditation. It's important. Important that we think about what it is that prepares us to do the difficult thing. Because sometimes, we feel this shame. We feel this, I'm not good enough. And how do we get through this layer of shame? How do we get through this layer of not good enough? How do we get us through that door? Self-love. That's all it is. Just self-love. So, self-love, how you do that, Emil? Take this hand, put it like this hand, put it like this. It's give yourself a soothing squeeze. Breathe in, breathe out. I like to use the 2-word meditation. Breathe in, think space. Breathe out, think free. Space. Free. Be bigger than the circumstance. Free yourself. Really free yourself. And keep that tight hug. Self-care. That's what it is. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Hey, Hey, catch us here live every day, 2 p.m. live streaming on Facebook at emilguillermo.media, on Twitter at Emil Amok, on YouTube, Emil Guillermo, the pathetic Emil Guillermo YouTube channel. Just catch us there live, catch the recordings, catch us on amok.com for the recordings. Back tomorrow, we'll talk more about Bong's victory. They're counting more votes, but it looks like a landslide. Marcos, with more than 28.8 million votes, is materializing. We'll talk about that. Talk more about the news. Till then, Emil Guillermo here. Mahal